All right. Well, I hope that as we head into this week, you're excited that school's done. At least those of us who are involved in school and have kids that are around, or maybe you're not. Maybe you wish school was still going. I don't know. And at the beginning of the summer, diving into all kinds of fun summer stuff. We're excited to talk about, we're talking about Cross Junior Camp. We're talking about Sports Camp. We'll have the registration for that up very, very soon. So kids can sign up for that. We're already thinking about 4th of July plans. And so last week, it definitely, just with the weather, it didn't feel like summer. This week feels a little bit better. So I hope you're in a good spot and just excited for where we're going to go. And I'm excited today that we are continuing in our study in the book of Mark. Over the last couple of weeks, we looked at Mark chapter 4, and today we're going to dive into Mark chapter 5. And as we've gone through all of the last couple weeks, and even earlier in Mark, in the earlier part of the year, one of the things that kind of has shown up as a theme to me as I've been studying and kind of going through these passages is there seems to be every once in a while there's a little bit of chaos that shows up in the midst of this story. And I think sometimes life in general feels like chaos. Like I said, hopefully at this point in the year, maybe things are feeling a little bit less chaotic, because I know with school schedules and things, that's usually when all the things are happening and all the projects are due and all the things that have to happen and the recitals and the graduations and all of that kind of stuff, right? It just gets chaotic. And then we get to this point, and hopefully you can take a little bit of a breath. But there are always times in life where things just feel chaotic. There's always something that's happening. And in those moments, it can be very difficult because you feel like you're on other people's timeline. It's not necessarily your desire or your decision that causes the chaos. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's your boss, or sometimes it's your kids, or sometimes it's a family member, and just things happen, and it just feels like chaos. And as I was going through this, and thinking about this, I just looked up kind of like a definition of chaos and what that would be just as far as Google is concerned. And this is what it says. It says a state of utter confusion, complete disorder, or a lack of organization. Now, honestly, as I read that, I kind of thought back to when I was a youth pastor. Because there were times when you were a youth pastor, if you were a youth pastor, where you actually wanted to create the chaos. Like it was actually kind of fun for a while at youth group to just create mass chaos. And one of the ways that this would happen, there were a few games we would play. And I remember specifically a game that would fit this description for me. I did not create this game. I was introduced to this game and I watched it be played. I had played it before. And then I saw it played again last year. Not at our student ministry, but a different student ministry I was at. And that game, and I'll explain in a minute, was called Spoke Tackle. Now, obviously, tackle's in the name, so you can imagine kind of what's happening in this game. But let me just explain it to you for a minute. So we'd usually have this game at a course or at an event that would go a week long, and you had different teams that were earning points. And so we would, mix up the kids and we'd put them randomly on a team. And so you'd have a red team and a blue team, a yellow team, green team, whatever. And we would play games throughout the week where you would want to get points for your team. And so the way we would set up this specific game was there would be someone, whether it was me or somebody else, another adult usually, standing on a chair in the middle of a circle. And they would have like a bullhorn, or maybe they could just yell really loud. And then around them, we would have the different groups of kids all lined up in spokes kind of going out from the middle of the wheel. And we would separate them by gender and age. So we'd have like the middle school girls, and then like the freshman and sophomore girls, and junior, senior girls. And then you'd split them up that way. And if you had more, you could split them up even smaller into grades and all that kind of stuff. And here was the idea. It was kind of like a duck, duck, goose kind of thing, but all we would do is the person standing in the middle on the chair would yell a group of kids. They would have to get up, run around all the other spokes, and then get back and be the first one closest to the chair that the person was standing on. We would usually give points for like first, second, and third place, so they were trying to get back. Now, here's the thing. On the way out and around, like anything goes. Now, we didn't want them like throwing fists or anything, but like if you had a friend and they were kind of slow and you just wanted to throw them off to the side, like that was legal, okay? So we would do this. So we would play this game. We'd have 911 on speed dial just in case, right? And we would play this game. And then we'd start slow, right? And we would just do one at a time and, just the girls or whatever. And then we would start sending multiple, right? So then you start sending multiple things and the kids are all mixed up. And then if you really wanted to get crazy, you'd send like 3 or 4 and then halfway around you'd yell reverse. So then they have to turn. And some kids are paying attention and some aren't. You always knew because the kids not paying attention just got slammed as everybody else came back the other way. This was chaos, right? The goal of the game was to create chaos. And we would watch this happen, and it was usually funny, and no one really got that hurt, but sometimes, whatever. But like we would go, and it would be fun. And it was to create chaos. And we just watch kids run and turn and go the other way and try and figure it out and be the first one back to the chair. And the person standing in the middle, right, had the rights to decide however this was going to go. We could yell everybody, we could yell one, we could yell three, we could yell reverse, we could yell, and we were in control of the chaos. And I think sometimes when we think about how life kind of will play out, it feels like someone standing in the middle of our life on a chair and just yelling different things that are going to cause chaos. Right? That job's not available anymore. That bill has to be paid now. That kid has to go to this school. That kid has to go to that activity. This person's not going to be around this week, so you have to cover for them. And like, it's not under your control. It's just chaos. And this is the way life can feel. And the thing that was nice when I was the person in the chair was I was in control, but often we are not in control. And we saw that a little bit last week. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we're going to see that as we go to our story this week. But I want us to focus on kind of this question and see what we learn from these scenarios in the book of Mark. I would ask this question: what happens when Jesus enters the chaos? And just see what shows up. What do you notice about when Jesus steps into these moments, when Jesus steps into these ideas and these scenarios? What happens when he shows up? Like I said before, we're going to go to Mark chapter 5, and if you want to follow along with us, all the verses and all the notes will be on our website. You can scan that QR code if you want, or if you miss it, just go to our website. We'll have them all there. You can follow along. We're not going to flip around too much today, but all the verses and notes will be on the screen for you as well. So Mark chapter 5, we're going to start in verses 1 and 2, and we'll take it from there. It says this: So they arrived at the other side of the lake in the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from the tombs to meet him. Okay, so let me give us a couple background just in case you missed last week or the last couple weeks. Okay, so here's where we've been. Beginning of Mark 4, Jesus is teaching. He actually pushes out on a boat and kind of teaches across the water so he can teach hundreds of people that have gathered on the banks. This happens over and over and over again. Jesus is around, he's teaching, he's doing miracles, a bunch of people show up. So he pushes out and he teaches these parables. We walked through the parables over the last couple weeks. And then last week he said it got to the end of the day. He was tired. He was done. He says, let's go over to the other side of the lake. So they turn the boat around and they go to the other side of the lake. What happens on the way there? Massive storm happens. Okay, in Mark it described it as a fierce storm. So bad, the boat started taking on water. So this is not a good situation. The disciples run to Jesus. They say, don't you care? Don't you care that we're going to drown? Jesus comes out and silences the storm, okay? So he shows up and silences. So then they're still on their way, right? So they get over. This is when they arrive at the other side. So this is right after the calming of the storm. It's the next morning. This is where they show up. And this is the first thing that happens. He climbs out of the boat, and a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from the tombs to meet him. Now, I want to take just a minute, camp on an idea here. Because it's easy, if you go to scripture often and you just kind of read through these stories, or maybe you've heard this story before, it can be easy to see something like that and just kind of like, oh yeah, demon-possessed guy. But like, how often do we just see that and just kind of go, oh yeah, it's the Bible, whatever. Like, what if it was real life? Like, we don't necessarily contextualize this all the time the way that we should. And what I want us to understand and know, first of all, is that demons are real. We talked about this a few years ago. We did a whole study on spiritual warfare and all of that kind of stuff, and we talked about demons and angels and things like that. If you missed that, you can go back and find it. But I want to, every once in a while, I circle back to this idea, and I want us to know and understand this, not from a freak out perspective, but from a perspective to recognize that this is not something that we just gloss over. It's not something that we just ignore or just kind of pretend doesn't exist or don't understand the reality of. One of the things that C.S. Lewis was famous for saying years and years ago, right, was this. He said, there are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils or demons. He says, one is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors. Here's what he's saying about that. He's saying, number one, sometimes people can just go, oh, they're not real, right? We just don't believe it, or we don't want to think about it. We don't want to know about the reality of demons, so we're just going to say, not a reality. The other side of it is we get too interested and too invested and too into those things and move towards them in a way that's unhealthy. And it's interesting that like over the course of every once in a while in our culture, like this conversation will come up. In fact, I think more so now the conversation about spirituality and what's out there and what's real, aliens and all that kind of stuff, right? You hear these conversations happening. And we think about this and what's true. And one of the things I just want to encourage us in is to recognize that they're real, but don't go to a place where we have an unhealthy fascination with it or something like that, where we start to engage in a way that's not good, that's not helpful, and moves us to a place that's not a good place spiritually or not in a good place to follow Jesus. I want us to understand this too, that we don't need to fear demons if our lives are submitted to Christ. One of the days that I was out, just about a month ago, I was out watering the grass around the playground that we put in. And there was a van that pulled up. Every once in a while, and I see this from my window every day, there's a handful of people that will pull up about once a week or maybe more, and they let their dogs out, and they just kind of run in the field, which is fine. They get out. And so I recognized this van because I had seen this van pull up before, and so I'm out there watering the grass. And so for the first time ever, though, the person that had driven the van starts walking over to me. And I'm like, okay, so we're having a conversation. It's great. So like he comes over, he just says, he looks at me and goes, "Are you the shepherd here?" And I was like, yes, I think the answer is that, yes. And he goes, "So I got a question for you." I go, "Okay." He goes, "If you are a follower of Jesus, can you be possessed by a demon?" I'm like, no introduction, like no, hey, how you doing? Like we're just diving right in. Okay. These are the questions. I was having a conversation with somebody a while ago. I was like, the things that people ask pastors sometimes, and it's just kind of fun, like just what happens. And so he asked me this question. So we have a little conversation, and he told me what his pastor thought, and I said what I thought. And I know that this is a question that people think about. And there's some nuance here as to what this means. And I want us to kind of know and understand this. I would say it this way, that when we find ourselves thinking about this idea, if our lives are committed to Jesus, if we are followers of Jesus, if we are saved and sealed for heaven, you are not going to accidentally get possessed by a demon one day, okay? You are not open to just somehow, some way you're going to wake up one morning and you have a demon. That's not what's going to happen. Now, there's another thing I want us to understand. We can find ourselves pursuing things that we shouldn't. So just like any follower of Jesus can fall into sin and find ourselves continuing on a path that we shouldn't go down and reaping the consequences of that, can we invite demonic activity into our lives that we don't want because we go down a bad path in an unhealthy fascination? I think that's possible. So I would just say to us, we do not need to be afraid. We don't have to be worried about this idea that we're going to wake up one day. We are protected. We have the Holy Spirit. However, we also know consequences to sin can happen. And if we're pursuing a unhealthy spiritual direction, we need to be careful about that. And so this is when we see these things come in. I just want us to be aware of that. I want us to think through it and understand how do we process this well. And I want us to think about this from the perspective of the man we're looking at. This guy isn't just another character who happens to be on the pages of Scripture. He was a real human being that Jesus came into contact with. And his story is one that Mark included on purpose. And so I want us to see what Jesus does in the midst of understanding what's going on in this man's life. So in verses 3-5, this is what it says. This man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrists and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. So just think about this. This guy's so strong, they chain him, doesn't work. They put shackles on him, doesn't work. He lives in the tombs and around the caves. Like, this is not where you want to live, right? No one in their right mind wants to go here and live here. And they just they can't do anything about him. He's just there in the town. They hear him howling and all kinds of stuff, right? This was the kind of thing where, have you ever gone to a place where you're going to a city and someone said, like, you're asking them about it and they're like, hey, you should go to this part of town. Like, don't go to that part of town, right? When you were new in this area, I feel like the conversation would be, you're going to hear some howling, don't go over there, right? Stay away from that guy. He's not good news. But this was the reality, and this is what everyone in this area knew. And this is the reality for this guy. And this is why I say I want us to understand and think about him as a human and not just a character in a story. But this man's life was destroyed by evil. Now, again, I don't want to go back to what we just talked about and say if we start to sin, just because we sin, we're going to end up possessed. This is not the point at all. But I want us to understand the implications of evil. Like, understand what happens when we start to go a direction we shouldn't go. We allow sin to go unchecked in our lives. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I am saying we need to recognize evil is bad. Like, it's an obvious thing to say, but sometimes we kind of gloss over it. It's not that bad. It's not a big deal. We'll get past it. I don't have to worry about it. It's not an issue right now. Like, evil wrecked this guy's life. And we don't know. What we don't know is what happened in his life before he got there. We don't know what his life was like before he was possessed, or what decisions he did or didn't make, or what he was involved in or not involved in. But it wrecked his life. And this is what he lost. He lost all control, sanity, dignity, community, and hope. He's not in control of his own body anymore. As much as maybe some of us would like to, none of us are strong enough that if you wrapped us in chains, we're just going to break them. He was. None of us are in a place where our sanity is in question. Like, I mean, he's in there maybe, but he's totally lost. He has no sense of what's good or bad. He's not in control of what's going on, and in his mind, he's gone. His dignity is gone. Some other translations would say he just ran around naked. Like, his dignity is absolutely gone. He's living in a place of just terrible existence. His community is gone. Like, here's the thing we have to understand too. Not only is he demon-possessed, he lives in caves where people are buried. This makes him unclean. We believe this guy was Jewish. This makes him unclean. So no one can go near him or make contact with him that also wants to stay clean, because they would become unclean because he's in the tombs all the time. So everybody around him that was his community, they've just gone away. They're like, we can't even help this guy anymore. And he lost all hope. Everyone around him just assumed he was a lost cause. He's done. It's over. We're just going to let him go. We're going to let him live up there. We're going to stay away from him. We're not going to go to that part of the town, and we just won't worry about it. Verses 6-8. It says, when Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed low before him. With a shriek, he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of the man, you evil spirit." The way that this kind of, hearing it this way, thinking about it in my mind, I feel like Jesus saw him coming, sees him running, and he just starts saying, "Get out, get out." He just starts saying it. And the guy runs to him and he bows. And he says, "Don't do this," right? Don't torture us. You know, it's very interesting. If we go back just briefly, thinking about what we talked about last week, what happened was when the disciples run down to the ship, the bottom of the ship, and they wake Jesus up, and he comes out and he calms the storm. It goes from a fierce storm to a calm storm. It's totally gone. It says the disciples asked the question, "Who is this man?" It's interesting to me that when a demon-possessed man runs to Jesus, he knows exactly who Jesus is. It's not a question for the demons. And we've seen this earlier in Mark as well. The disciples, the ones closest to him, the humans that are around him all the time, eating meals with him, seeing him do miracles, all that kind of stuff, they ask, "Who is this guy? Why can he do these things? This is incredible." But when the demons come before Jesus, they know exactly who he is, and don't miss what they say. I just wrote it out, right? The demons know exactly who Jesus is. They call him the Son of the Most High God. There would have been an understanding, especially in this culture. This was a Gentile area. So in general, there would have been a lot of different gods at play in this area. And so what the people saw and understood when this person was talking was, he's not saying he's just God. Like, he didn't just say that Jesus was a God. Even the demons were kind of proclaiming to the people listening at that moment that this guy is greater than all the other gods that you know and understand. This is coming from the place, from the voice of a demon recognizing just who Jesus is. Then in verses 9-10, it says this, "Then Jesus demanded, 'What is your name?' And he replied, 'My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man.' Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place." Now here's the thing. We don't know 100% how many demons were there. We're going to have an idea in the next verses about how many there were at least. But when they use the word legion, a legion could be up to 6,000 soldiers. This was a military term, and it's not an exact term, but it could mean up to that many. So our understanding is this. There's thousands of demons involved in this man's life. Like if you thought one demon was chaotic, thousands is crazy. This man had been tortured for a long time with this reality. So this is what happens in verses 11 to 13. It says, there happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. Send us into those pigs, the spirits begged. Let us enter them. So Jesus gave them permission. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd of about 2,000 pigs plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. So there's 2,000 pigs that head off this cliff. We know there's at least 2,000 demons involved, right? If you get the weekly emails, I said this week is demons, chaos, and wasted bacon. This is the wasted bacon, right? All the pigs go off the hillside. So he casts them out, they go into the pigs, and the pigs die. Verses 14 and 15 says, the herdsmen fled to the nearby town and surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what had happened. A crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by a legion of demons. He was sitting there, fully clothed and perfectly sane. Catch the next phrase. And they were all afraid. Interesting. So last week, Jesus takes the fierce storm and makes great calm, and it said the disciples were terrified. Seems like the opposite of what you should feel in that moment. And then in this case, they all knew this guy. This was no secret. They knew who he was, and they show up, and he's sitting there. He's fully clothed, he's completely sane, and they're all terrified again. Like, shouldn't this be the opposite recognition? The opposite understanding of now we don't have to worry about this guy anymore? But here's what happens in both of these situations. And this is where I think it takes us some work to understand where they are and what they understand in these moments with Jesus. They recognize his ability to change everything. You see, there are moments in our world where there's somebody who's sick, and we pray for them, and they get better. So when Jesus shows up, and I'm not saying it's any less miraculous, but I'm just saying Jesus shows up and heals somebody, it's a little less jarring because you're watching something happen to somebody else, and you can see like they're just better. It's like we can understand that. We have a frame of reference for that in our minds. But none of us, I don't think, have ever been on a boat, and there's a crazy storm, and then in a second, it's all gone. That doesn't happen. And I don't think any of us have been in a space where we've seen this. And this wasn't just a one-day thing where this guy was going crazy for one day and then the next day he was better. This was a consistent thing that this was just part of their town now. This is part of what they dealt with. And they knew who this guy was. And then all of a sudden one day he is not nuts anymore. He's completely sane and he's just sitting there and everybody's going, what the heck happened? How is this possible? And they become afraid just because now he's not possessed anymore. And this is what happened to this man. The demon-possessed man is completely made new. Paul would give us a reference for this in 2 Corinthians 5:17. This is what it says. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. See, Paul puts this into words. And this is what's true. For anybody that decides to follow Jesus, the old life is gone and the new has come. Now, here's what's sometimes a little bit difficult. When I was in high school and I was a college student and we would go on like mission trips, one of the things that would happen is they would always have us write our testimony. And so we'd start to dig into that, and some kids had different stories. Like some kids would talk about maybe a broken household they were a part of or some things that they had dealt with in life. Maybe they lost a parent or something like that. And so they would talk about those moments in their lives and talk about how God had worked through them and all that kind of stuff. But largely, most of those kids were kind of like me. Like we kind of just grew up in church, and I was 6 years old, and I came to know Jesus. And there's not necessarily this story that you can always grab onto of like, when I was 5 years old, I was dealing drugs and doing all this crazy stuff, and then Jesus comes into my life and everything changes. And it's hard to understand this moment of, what is my testimony? How does everything change from one moment to the next? And it's hard sometimes because we look at these stories, and for this man, everything changed. We became made new. But we read Paul's words sometimes, I think, and we go, so what's new? Like, I don't know what was different necessarily because I was so young or I just grew up in this context. So what's happened in my life that's been so new? And I would encourage us, those of us that maybe are like me, or maybe you've had that experience before, that we would think about and understand, what is different in our life moving forward and how Jesus has moved in our lives as we've been followers of his, even though he didn't actually have us in a place where we have the kind of testimony of other people. In fact, sometimes we should look at those moments and say, thank the Lord that I didn't have a testimony like that and that he spared me from all of that. That we are a new person. That there was a path that we would have headed down, or we could have gone down or been a part of, and we don't make those decisions, and we aren't in that space. And we say, praise the Lord that my new life I've been able to experience for maybe the majority of my life, if that's part of your story. But this is what happened for the man, right? The chaos in this man's life is transformed by the presence of Jesus. You see, what happened that day was not just that he had these demons cast out of him. That's not the only thing that happened. That was a big deal. That was a fantastic thing that happened. But he also, I believe, put his faith and trust in Jesus as his Savior. And so everything changed in his life because Jesus showed up that day. Because Jesus came into the chaos and everything changed. Verses 16 to 18. It says, then those who had seen what happened told the others about the demon-possessed man and the pigs. And the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. But then as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Two very different responses. Everybody in the town saw what happened. They say, Jesus, please leave. We don't want you here anymore. But the guy who was possessed, he goes after Jesus. And as Jesus is getting ready to leave, to give the people what they want, he asks to go with them. I would say when moments in life show up that feel chaotic, we've got two choices. And I think it's shown by the people in these last couple of verses. In the midst of chaos, we have to ask the question, do we run to Jesus or from Jesus? In those moments where life just kind of gets nuts, and we feel like someone's standing in the middle of the spoke tackle circle and just yelling things to create chaos, where do we go? It can be very easy to run away or go the other direction, because here's where our brains can go sometimes. I think our brains can go, Jesus and church are just one more thing to add to the chaos right now. I don't want to go that direction. And it can be easy to take that part of the equation and go, I'm just going to set that over here. Jesus will be here when I get back. I'm going to put him over here. I'm going to deal with everything that's going on over here, and I'm going to worry about that when I can. I think that's the opposite response we should have. I think when the chaos starts to show up, that the things of Jesus, our connection to him, our prayers, our connection through scripture, our connection through church, those are the things that should be the things that are focused on to inject Jesus into that chaos rather than allowing it to be the opposite. Because here's what's true, and we see this from the people in the story. It can be tempting to get comfortable in our chaos. Here's what I mean by that. There is an aspect of life being chaotic that we can almost wear as a badge of honor. That we kind of go, I'm busy. Like there's something to being busy that can be attractive because we've got a lot going on. And so when we talk to other people and we can list all the things we've got going on and all the things we have happening in our lives and good, bad, indifferent, whatever, and like we look at other people and we go, oh, they're not doing very much. I got more going on than them. And we can like look at that and like compare ourselves and say, look at all the good things I've got going on. And we can get comfortable in that chaos. In fact, there are many of us that would say, and I can be this person too, if my calendar isn't just like planned out and I know what's going on, I feel like I'm not doing anything. It can be easy to get comfortable in the chaos. And here's where that starts to become an issue and a rub when we're followers of Jesus is this. Because when Jesus shows up and those priorities need to change and he starts to move in that chaos, we resist it because we're comfortable in the chaos we've created. When we're comfortable in the chaos we've created and Jesus shows up and starts to go, hey, we're not going to go this direction, we're going to go that direction. We're not going to allow this to be the center of our attention. I'm going to be the center of attention. We can react like the people in the story where Jesus shows up and changes a bunch of things and they go, Jesus, will you just leave? We don't want you here. And understandably, like with the pigs, like I understand, they lost a lot in those pigs. There were farmers that had herdsmen that had these pigs and that was important to them. And so they show up and they go, Jesus just caused us to lose a lot of things. We don't want him around anymore. The same thing can happen to us. We get comfortable in that chaos, and when Jesus shows up and starts moving things around, we don't want him to be a part of it, but this is the decision we have to make. Your heart either bows to the king or it bows to the concerns of this life. This is the decision, by the way, everybody makes about Jesus. They either bow in submission to him and say, you're the Lord of my life, you're the king of the universe, you're the one who's going to get all my time and attention, you're the one who's going to be the center of the attention. Or we say, you know what, the other things that I want to worry about are more important to me. The pursuits I have, the places I want to go, the things I want to create, those are more important to me. And when that is the case, we look at Jesus just like the people in the story and we go, Jesus, please leave. We don't want you to be a part of this. Or we can be like the demon-possessed man. And we can look at his life and we can see the difference Jesus made in him. And what was his response? To run after Jesus and say, can I go with you? He says, I don't want you to leave. Actually, I want to go where you're going. I want to be one of your followers. You showed up and my whole life changed. I want to go after you. So what's Jesus' answer to him in verses 19 and 20? It might not be what you thought. He says, but Jesus says, no, go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been. So the man started off to visit the 10 towns in that region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed at what he told them. Jesus says, you're not coming with me. You've got work to do here. It's interesting to me, the first thing he says is very simple. He simply says, go home. Now here's what we don't know. We don't know who was at home waiting for this guy, but somebody was. Maybe it was his parents, maybe his wife, maybe his kids. And think about what their life was like with this guy being connected to their family. Maybe you've got like a crazy uncle nobody talks to or something like that, right? This is way worse, all right? And everyone in town, when somebody new would show up in town, or there'd be somebody, they'd go, who is that, right? And they had a choice to make. They either go, oh yeah, that's my son, husband, kid, or they go, I don't even know, man. That guy's been up there for a while, right? They just ignore him. But one day, he showed up at home. And maybe he walked in the front door and they did kind of like a double take and like backed up for a minute because they saw that no one could restrain this guy. And yet he's completely sane. And here's what I know to be true, right? In different conversations with people, having gone through things like addictions, or maybe even people that have like walked out of prison and they go home, and you have a conversation and people will ask, right? They'll ask the wife, they'll ask the kids. They go, are they different? Because the people that know them best can tell when something's different or not. They may be able to put on a show for other people, but the people closest to them, that live with them, that are with them every day, they can tell whether they're different or not. And Jesus goes, go home and show the people closest to you, the people that live at your house, how different you are. So he says, go home, and he says, go tell. He tells them two specific things, right? He says, tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been. And ultimately, I think Jesus wants him to do this. He wants the man to show them the difference in him. For us, it would be show people the difference in us. Show them how we're different. I think sometimes this kind of idea gets lost on us. Because there's times where we just go, I don't want to be the center of attention, right? It doesn't need to be all about me. Like, I don't need to feel like I'm the one talking or whatever. Like, we can be in those moments where we're like, the people don't need to hear my story or hear what I have to say. But I would challenge us just to kind of think this through and think about what Jesus tells this man. I would encourage you to ask yourself this question. What has the Lord done for you? And there's the Sunday school church answer, right? Jesus died for me. He rose for me. I get that, right? We're moving past that for a minute. I'm thinking specifically for you in your life. What has he done for you? Have you ever sat down and just listed things that he's done for you? Because if you haven't, I think you should. Because I think what will surprise you is even if right now you're like, I wonder what I would say. You start listing things and pray about it, and your brain and the Holy Spirit will move through you, and you will start to see all the things that God has done for you. And then ask yourself this question. How has he been merciful to you? How have you maybe messed up or something like that, and there were consequences, but the consequences weren't what they could have been? He was merciful to you. How have you found yourself, maybe you've been tempted by something, or something like that, and you go and you haven't engaged in it, you haven't gone that direction, and you recognize like God was merciful to you in that moment because he stopped you from going a direction you could have gone. How has he been merciful to you? After you answer these questions, or if you can answer these questions, I ask you this: have you told anyone? Have you ever sat down with somebody and said, this is how God was good to me. This is how he moved in this situation. This is how he showed up when I didn't know that he would. This is how he was merciful to me. Have you told anyone? Because I think that this is what we need to understand. We don't want to rob people of the blessing of seeing God's work in your life. When this demon-possessed man all the demons were cast out and he decides to follow Jesus, Jesus says, go home, go tell him, show him the difference. And he doesn't just do it at home. He goes to the 10 other towns in this region telling everyone. Listen, sometimes God does work in your life, not just for you, but for the people around you to see and understand him as well. It's not necessarily a secret that we're supposed to keep and say, don't tell anyone. Now, there are times where Jesus shows up and he does work and he goes, don't tell anybody yet, right? But he doesn't tell us that. When these moments happen and we have the opportunity to see how God moved in our life, we don't want to rob people of the blessing of seeing God's work in our lives. We should share those moments and say, look at what God did. Look at how he's been good to me. As we step out of this and kind of wrap up this conversation, I want us to think about the responses, particularly of the people in the town, again, and the demon-possessed man. And think about the options we have and how we respond to Jesus in moments of chaos and in just moments of regular life as well. And ultimately, there's two responses to Jesus, right? That you either beg him to stay or you beg him to go. There's people, and maybe we've been those people at times where we actually don't want Jesus around in our life. We don't want him involved. We don't want him to have a say. We just kind of, like I said before, we kind of exclude him off to the side. And the people look at Jesus and they say, we just don't want you here. But the other option is we ask him to stay or we ask to go with him. And my question would be this: if somebody looked at your life, which one would they see? Would they see you asking Jesus into the equation over and over and over again? Jesus, will you stay? Jesus, can I go with you? Jesus, I don't want you to leave. And I don't mean begging him because you think he's going to leave you, because if you're a follower of Jesus, he's never going to leave you. But do we keep pursuing him and going in that direction? Or have we decided we don't want Jesus to be a part of it and we've set him off to the side? And here's what I know to be true, is that Jesus, and I use this word on purpose, Jesus will ruin your life in the best way. We all at times have this idea of where we think we're going to go in life or what we want to do. And those things aren't necessarily bad. Like if we want a certain job that we feel called to, not bad. If we want to marry someone eventually and have kids, not bad. If we want to own a home in a certain area or live in a certain state, not bad. But here's what I'll say to you. If those desires and thoughts and goals are above our willingness to follow Jesus, we've got it reversed. It's the wrong order. Here's what I know to be true. When we decide we're going to give it all over to Jesus and say we're going to go wherever you've called us to go, we're going to stay wherever you've called us to stay, those plans that we've made are probably going to get ruined to some capacity. At some level for us, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be a bunch of pigs we own at some point, and they're going to go off a cliff for Jesus, okay? There's going to be something that we pursued, something we wanted, something we stored up, something whatever, and Jesus goes, that's not it. And we're going to get rid of that. And the question is whether we're okay with it. One of the funny little ways that we've kind of seen this as we've been part of it is Becca and I are both from Coatesville. We've been more from Chester County. Like when I was choosing a college, I had two choices. I had LBC, and it was Philadelphia Biblical at the time. It was Cairn now. And I went, I don't want to live in Lancaster County. I'm going to go towards Philly. Look where I am, okay? We always had that draw, and we always kind of thought, we don't really ever want to live in Lancaster County. We don't want to live where we smell manure, and we don't want to hear any cows. Well, guess what? You sit in our backyard for 5 minutes. We're like, the cows are doing something down there because we can hear them from our backyard. And we love it. We've turned around and we go, we love this because this is where we're supposed to be. It wasn't necessarily our plan. It wasn't that we had this thought that we were going to move to Lancaster County one day. We had a different idea of where we would go. And yet Jesus goes, nope, not where you're supposed to go. This is where you're supposed to go. And those plans get ruined. But I'll tell you this, right? When we allow Jesus to ruin those plans that we follow that are Jesus' plans are always better than ours. But when he shows up and starts mixing things up and throwing pigs off cliffs and starts casting demons out, we got to be okay with him changing the chaos and not just living in our own chaos, but saying we're going to follow him instead and say, whatever Jesus does, that's where I want to go. Whatever Jesus wants from me, wherever his plan is going, that's what I want. Not the chaos I can create, not the world I can create, not the kingdom that's important to me, but that's where I'm going to go. And every day we wake up and we say, Jesus, where do you want me to go? What's the plan? Where are we going today? And just see where he takes us. And it can be a scary thing because he ruins the normal. He ruins the thing we're comfortable with. He ruins the thing we thought we wanted or we thought was best. But the uncomfortability with Jesus is always better than being comfortable in our own chaos. And when Jesus shows up in the chaos, it changes everything. And it doesn't mean the chaos won't happen. It doesn't mean the storms aren't going to come. It's different when we've got Jesus to hold on to and we say, I know I'm going the right direction because I'm following Jesus. Because if we're going our own direction and chaos shows up, guess what? It might just be us. It might be us going the wrong way, making the wrong decision, saying, I'm creating chaos I shouldn't have created in the first place. But when we're going with Jesus, the chaos is not ours, and he will walk with us through it. How are you inviting Jesus into your life on a regular basis? How are you begging him to stay instead of letting him out? And how are you inviting him into the chaos?